So good morning from Chokoloskee Island. So for this video I'm going to talk about the Milky Way, and I'm really wanting to speak to the nature photographer who has never photographed night sky or Milky Way before. When I started photographing night sky photography, I never, it was never on my radar screen because I found it intimidating, and that was because I didn't think I had the equipment or the skills to pull it off. So, but I know better now, and I know that there are photographers out there that are thinking, I just don't have the equipment to do this. I'd really like to, but I don't think I can. And so this video today, I want to show you that it's very likely that you do have the equipment and the skills needed to shoot your first Milky Way. Okay, so what do you need to shoot the Milky Way? So first of all, you need preferably an SLR camera or a DSLR camera, and you most likely have that already. And it's important that you understand why you need a DSLR. So first of all, you have to be able to attach a lens. And there are features in that camera that you also need available to you. First of all, you need to be able to control your exposure settings. That means shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. You also need to be able to do long exposures. So my experience shooting the Milky Way is I've used 20 to 30 second exposures. And then you also need to be able to put it into manual focus. So you're not going to be using autofocus out there. So manual focus, and your lens also needs to be manual focus. Your DSLR camera is either full frame or it is a cropped sensor camera. You don't need a full frame camera to shoot the Milky Way. So just understand the differences between the two. So the second thing you need to shoot the Milky Way is you need a wide angle lens. So in my experience, that typically means 16 to 24 millimeters. Now, if you do have a crop sensor camera, and this is a crop sensor camera, what that means is that the focal length of the lens is going to look a little differently than on a full frame. And so on my camera right now, I have a Tokina 11 to 16 millimeter lens. And what that means on my crop sensor camera is that I have a crop factor of 1.5. So 11 millimeters is really 11 multiplied by 1.5. So that's about 16. And 16 millimeters on the lens is really 16 times 1.5. So that's about 24. So for all intents and purposes, I have a 16 to 24 millimeter focal length range. So, so you need to have that wide angle. You're going to be shooting a big sky, so wide angle is really necessary. Now, with your wide angle, you may wish for a fast lens if you don't have one right now. The fast lens is determined by the F number that is associated with your lens. So every lens has an F number. Mine is f2.8. So what that means is that when I have this lens attached to my camera, I can open up the aperture as wide as 2.8. Now remember, the lower the F number, the wider the aperture. The wider the aperture, the more light that is allowed in. And that's what you really want when you're shooting the Milky Way. The reason for that is it just gives you a little more leverage when it comes to shutter speed and ISO, because those two settings are more problematic for night sky photography, and I'm going to talk about those later. But the wider your aperture is, the better as far as quality goes. But if you have a kit lens, your widest aperture is likely going to be 3.5, 4.0, so not as wide as the 2.8 or the 1.4. Don't think that you can't go out and shoot the Milky Way because you don't have a fast lens. You can, just understand you're going to be a little more limited as far as your shutter speed and ISO settings. So the other thing you're going to need is a tripod. With the long exposure, you just cannot get around it. You don't need an expensive carbon fiber. You just need a tripod that is steady. And then you need a ball head to attach to that tripod. So that is definitely something you need. The other thing that, when you're doing long exposure, you may want a cable release that you can attach to your camera. Now, the cable release is just to allow you to avoid touching the camera when you hit that shutter button. You don't want that shake going on. Now, if you don't have a cable release or a remote control, that's okay, because you can set the timer on your camera. Okay, so the other thing you are definitely going to need is a light, preferably a headlamp. You need some kind of light source to help you get around when you get out there in the dark. So the other thing you're going to need is a dark sky. So to help you figure out when and where you're going to shoot the Milky Way, it's very useful. It's not necessary, but it's extremely useful to have an app on your phone that's going to help you figure that out. I can go into my app and it will give me a list of all the dates when I have an opportunity when the Milky Way is visible in the sky and I have an opportunity to photograph it. Then I start thinking about location. So I may already have a location in mind. So I can look at my app and I can bring it up on the screen, the GPS, and I can see where the Milky Way falls in the sky. What direction is it falling in? And over a 2 or 3 hour period, when it is visible, I can see how it changes across the sky. But even better, the app is going to give me a live view. And if you have the opportunity to go on location ahead of time, you can put your app in live view and you can hold it up to the sky, and with the scene in front of you, you can see where that Milky Way is going to be on the night that you actually go to shoot it. Okay, so now you know you have everything you need to get your first Milky Way shot. Okay, so now you might have a location and a date set up to do that. And so the day before is when you're going to get everything ready for that shoot. But first and foremost, you really need to pay attention to the weather, because if it's not cooperating and you don't have a clear sky, you're not going to get that shot. You're going to want to get your equipment ready to go, because you don't want to be fumbling around in the dark doing all of that once you get there. So first of all, with your tripod, just get your ball head attached, have that ready to go. Easy enough. You're going to want to make sure that you have fresh batteries in your camera, and maybe bring 1 or 2 extra batteries. You're also going to want to make sure you have fresh batteries in your headlamp or your flashlight, and bring extras. Now, as far as getting your camera ready to go, obviously you're going to have your lens attached, and you don't need your lens hood, so just get rid of that. Don't even bring it. And you're going to want to maybe get some things set up in your camera ahead of time. So first of all, the exposure settings, you can go ahead and set up your shutter speed to approximately maybe 20 seconds or 30 seconds, because it's going to be somewhere in that range. It's really a narrow range of shutter speed and ISO that you're working with out there. The ISO, that's really going to depend on your camera, but as an example, all my Milky Way shots have been shot from 2000 to 3200. I've never gone above 3200. So I'll just put it at 3200. I'll set the shutter speed at 30 seconds. And of course, the aperture is always going to be at its widest. So I put mine at 2.8. So I have those set up. Okay, the other thing you're going to want to use, or I highly recommend you use it when you're out there, is live view. If you have a camera that's less than 10 years old, a DSLR camera, you are likely, you have live view feature in your camera. Some cameras, like I think Nikon and I know for sure Canon, they have a dedicated button for live view that you can just hit the button to turn it on and turn it off again. But the most important feature of live view, and the reason why you want to be thinking about that when you go out to shoot your Milky Way, is that first of all, you're going to be looking through the LCD and maybe the viewfinder if you have live view in the viewfinder. You're going to be looking at the LCD panel, and you're going to have another button that you push that allows you to magnify what you see. So it's zooming in on what's in front of the lens. The reason why you want to use that is because you're going to use it to help you manually focus on the stars. So it just allows you to see the stars better so you can focus in on them. The other feature that's in your camera is something called long exposure NR, noise reduction. Do you have it on or do you have it off? It sounds like something you would want to have on, because what happens is for a long exposure, let's say 30 seconds, the camera immediately after that is going to process the image. It's going to take it 30 seconds to do that, and what it's trying to do is it's trying to reduce the noise. So noise reduction sounds like a good thing, but just note there's two disadvantages. One is you're using up time for the camera to process, and then also it uses up battery a little bit faster. All right, so those are two things to consider. But I'll tell you why I don't use mine. First of all, I've not seen a difference. When I look at my images with or without the noise reduction, I don't see any difference. And second of all, I can manage noise in my post-processing workflow. So there's a lot of good software out there, including Photoshop's Camera Raw noise reduction, that will usually take care of that quite well for you. So I recommend you have that off. Okay, so the other thing you're going to want to probably have ready to go, if you're not going to be using a cable release, is have your timer set up, and mine is set up for 2 seconds. If you are using a cable release, then attach it ahead of time. And as far as white balance is concerned, I would just put it in auto, and you can always change that in your post-processing, assuming you're shooting in RAW, which you should be. And then lastly, you want to put it in manual focus, and that also includes your lens. With my lens, it's just a matter of adjusting this focus ring right here. And so you want to make sure that the lens and the camera are communicating manual focus. And one last thing, because this is a long exposure and you're going to have your camera on your tripod, shut off your image stabilization. Some of you have it in your lens, some of you, like mine, I have it inside my camera, and I just shut that steady shot off. Now, one last thing here. I've been talking about controlling exposure settings, our 3 exposure settings. What if you're somebody who shoots in auto exposure mode? If you are shooting auto exposure mode, you're going to need to stop doing that, especially if you're going to start doing night sky photography. You really need to get out of that anyway if you want to get better at your photography. What if you use aperture priority or shutter speed priority? What if those are your preferred modes for exposure? Can you shoot the Milky Way in either of those? Well, the answer to that is yes, you can, but you must use exposure compensation. That's you telling the camera that you need to expose above or below its meter, okay, because it always wants to meter in the middle. But you're going to tell it to meter up 1 or 2 stops above that. Okay, you're ready to get out there and shoot your first Milky Way. You've got all the equipment you need. You've identified a night that you can go out and get a dark sky as well as a clear sky. You're ready to go. For my next video, I'm going to show you on location how to get a sharp Milky Way. So we're going to talk about focusing, but we're also going to talk about that ISO and shutter speed, those problematic settings, because the quality of your image really, really depends on those two. So we'll talk about that, and we're also going to talk about light painting. So stay tuned as we continue with this Shoot the Milky Way for the first time. And you